it's also what OSINT is not. And in that regard, OSINT is not just merely snooping on social media. Don't get me wrong. I spend a lot of time on social media when looking at businesses. I'm not even going to lie. Snapchat and Instagram work wonders. And I'll show you, time permitting, I'll show you some techniques with that as well. But there's a lot more to it. And it's not just using tools like ReconNG or Datasploit or the Harvester, Spiderfoot, Maltego, etc. Conversely, it's also not using Nmap, Nessus, etc. Because if we want to think about like the defined ethical hacking pen testing process, right? This is part of the passive reconnaissance phase. And as we're talking about passive reconnaissance, what we are specifically talking about is very few opportunities for detection. So we're not actively interrogating hosts. We're not actively interrogating a domain. We are learning about it before we go in. I always say that OSINT is comprised of science, art, and philosophy. If you compare, like, for example, if you compare myself with a coworker of mine, Ginsberg 5150, he's fairly well known in the OSINT community. If you compare the two of us, we operate vastly different. And what I mean by that is, from a tool perspective, I'm a bigger fan of ReconNG. He's a bigger fan of Spiderfoot. We have two completely different ways of going about reaching the conclusions that we seek to reach. But at the end of the day, while we have two completely different methods, we tend to arrive at similar conclusions. Not always the same conclusions, but oftentimes similar. OSINT is also not a linear process. A linear process, basically by definition, has a defined starting and stopping point. And what I mean by that is you have a predetermined input and a predetermined output or possible outputs. You put that input through a set of steps, or an algorithm, if you will, and if the conditions are right, it produces the output. And I'll explain why OSINT is not a linear process in just a moment. It's not purely automated. We can do a lot of things via the automated tools, don't get me wrong. That is really good amplification, and it's really good augmentation of our efforts as practitioners. But you don't want to rely solely on the automated tools, because a lot of this you have to be able to draw your conclusions and determine, hey, there is causation here. I can see correlation. I should take a closer look at this as a byproduct of this. It's not just some mysterious magic as well. I mean, I do want to believe that there's some magic associated with OSINT. Some of the things that I've came across, it's just like, why did I even think to use that technique? Why did this even work? But at the end of the day, I'll take it. So OSINT is, in addition to the definition, it is cyclic. And that's what I was referring to about it's not a linear process. So a cycle is made up of several interconnected processes, right? And when we think about OSINT as a cycle, OSINT is going to continue cyclically until we have a reason to stop. And you can think about a cycle as kind of how a car works. You start the car with that as a process, starting the car, putting the key in the ignition, turning the key, getting fuel from your fuel tank into the cylinder to thus create combustion, right? That is a process. Once combustion starts, it cyclically continues with several interconnected processes, meaning it's still going to have a process to get fuel from the fuel tank. It's still going to have a process for combustion. There's still a timing belt that's going to control the processes. You still have your electrical and mechanical controls, but combustion itself, from the purpose of a car, it's going to continue until pretty much one of three conditions are met. The three conditions for a car would be you run out of fuel, you have a mechanical, electrical, electronic, or other type of defect that causes the process to stop, or you manually intervene and stop the process. With OSINT, it's very similar. So looking at it from a penetration testing perspective, you have a certain number of billable hours that you are going to use against a particular customer, and you know that within the scope of this, they have this amount of web presence that's within scope, and as a byproduct, for the sake of argument, we'll say it's a 10-hour engagement, and you know it's going to take you about an hour to 2 hours to do reporting, so that's 8 hours. So at this rate, you have to determine from those 8 hours, where can you find the most time? And I've talked to various pen testers, and the number that I hear is anywhere between 40 and 70% of the time spent on a pen test should be spent doing OSINT. So basically, you have, we'll just say, out of 8 hours, we'll just say 4 of them are going to be OSINT and 4 of them will be actual testing. From that perspective, you know that you have 4 hours to do it. So your cycle will continue for up to 4 hours. But other things that could stop that cycle would be finding something that provides you a rapid path to meeting your objective of exploitation and gaining the simulated unauthorized access. Does that make sense? And as I stated before, OSINT is also passive in nature. I like to say that the best OSINT would be the kind that cannot be readily detected or prevented. Oftentimes, like when I'm snooping a company website, I typically try to blend in as a traditional user, just because I don't want to do anything that's going to give any webmaster or any network team a reason to block my IP address and force me to hop onto a different VPN to get a different IP address. But with OSINT, probably the most important 2 bullets on the slide would be it is dependent upon critical thinking, because at the end of the day, again, you have all of these sensors, you have all of this stuff that you can collect and all of this information that you can derive from it. But what it really boils down to is you have to find the relationships yourself, and that is really that hinges upon critical thinking. Hence why in the beginning I said that the most important OSINT tool is the one that's perched upon our shoulders, our minds. But OSINT as a whole is also a very powerful amplifier for other disciplines. And basically, in that regard, here are probably the 5 forms of other intelligence that OSINT is probably the most impactful with. So OSINT, I didn't mention it before, but OSINT is open source intelligence. But then we have GeoInt, which is geospatial intelligence. That's information derived from commercial mapping and imagery products associated with mapping. We have SIGINT, signals intelligence. SOCMINT, social media intelligence. FinInt, which is financial intelligence, and HUMINT, human intelligence. So in this regard, SIGINT is more or less the technical exploitation, and HUMINT is more or less social engineering. So keeping that part in mind, we can see where OSINT would probably allow us to have better context for both of those disciplines, but it's not. There are other disciplines beyond this as well. On the other side of the coin, OSINT also helps tremendously with threat intelligence. So that's another adjacent form. But with this, basically, the way I like to think of OSINT is it's basically going to enable us to do several things. I've got an asterisk next to attribution because I tend to be of the frame of mind that attribution is a very imperfect, I think the term I would use would be pseudoscience. It is not always accurate, as we can see, because when we start looking at who did what, people borrow each other's techniques quite frequently, and that makes it very challenging for us to say definitively it was this organization or that organization, or it came from this country or that country. So with that, OSINT can enable it to a degree, but at the same time, it all hinges upon what I call the fidelity of your information. And the fidelity of the information is going to be highly dependent upon the quality of your data source and how well it corroborates with other data sources. But from a more defensive perspective, it can also be used for an external risk assessment, basically to find out what an adversary would see and what can be used against a victim company. It can be helpful in asset inventories, because oftentimes people don't maintain good asset inventories, and what ends up happening is that things end up on the internet that they are not aware of. One of my favorite jokes is Shodan should not be your asset inventory system. I have seen OSINT used and personally been involved with doing insider threat analysis using OSINT. And the perspective of insider threat that we were looking at didn't really even, part of it had to do with OSINT in terms of we were seeing indications of an insider threat, but there was a lot of language analysis associated with it to find things based on the styling and spelling of certain words and particular phrases, and trying to find instances of that same phrase used elsewhere. But, you know, at the same time, you can use OSINT in many cases to validate that a fix has been applied and measure one's attack surface. And then, while it's not purely defensive, competitive analysis is definitely something that OSINT can help with as well, because companies do tend to try to find out what their competitors are doing so that they can remain, ironically, competitive in the market. So, obviously, competitive analysis is very important in that regard. So, in offensive engagements, here's where the rubber meets the road for this presentation, and this is really what's going to take you from zero to hero, if you will, in terms of using OSINT in an offensive manner. So, back to that 40 to 60% or 40 to 70% of the time for an engagement, this is why it's important, because it's going to give us context and insight about an organization. We never want to just blindly start to attempt exploitation. We need some context around what the organization has, what they're dealing with, what their technologies are, who the people of an organization are. And then my personal favorite, I'm not the most talented red teamer or pen tester on the planet, but I'm very efficient at identifying logic flaws and processes. And within those processes, I do attempt to find lapses in judgment and lapses in logic that does allow me to gain the access that I'm looking for. Probably my most successful social engineering engagement was a few years ago. I sent an email. I did everything the right way. I sent the email, and a user reported me within my first batch of emails sent, because I don't use automated emailers whenever I do phishing. And it was out of my first batch. So I was looking at the server logs, and I had about, I think my success rate for getting people to input information was about 6%, which I don't really care about opens, and I don't really care about clicks. I care more about the amount of people who put information into a form. So 6%, I mean, it's not terrible, because depending on who's in that 6%, I could have got some pretty high-level access, but it wasn't the number I was looking for. But what ended up happening is there was a flaw in the logic of how they addressed it. So the person reported me, and subsequently they blocked all of my future incoming emails. So I was stuck. And I thought, okay, well, I'm stuck at 6%. I'm going to call it quits on this engagement. Fortunately, I didn't turn off my web server, because what happened, and this is the major logic flaw, their network administrator, who was not aware that a pen test was going on, forwarded the email that I had sent, but they did not defang the link. So they sent the email out with the link intact, and they didn't do anything to block anyone internally from accessing the link. So what happened was they sent an email out to the entire company saying, hey, we've got a malicious email. Ignore this email if you get it. Don't click this link. And you know what happens when people say don't click this link, right? Everybody wants to click this link and find out why you shouldn't click this link. So in that regard, we can find out more about how an organization runs, what technologies they use, so that way we're not wasting our time on Apache vulnerabilities if they run Nginx, or we're not wasting our time looking for WordPress directories if everything is static, or they use a different CMS or something. In terms of the people, not all employees within an organization are equal. And I know that sounds a little bit rough around the edges to consider, but obviously you've got your high value assets, which would be like your C-suite, but you also have certain employees that are in more sensitive roles and more lucrative to malicious adversaries than others. But at the same time, taking a very solid OSINT centered approach to pen testing, that allows us to reduce opportunities for the party that we are working with to detect us, and we can actually do some technology and vulnerability enumeration as we are doing our test, so that ultimately what ends up happening is we already know what technologies they use, and based on the banners, based on the source code, based on all this stuff we see, we already know which version, and we've already looked in exploit DB. We've already looked at how we could potentially exploit these specific technologies, so we don't have to be ultra noisy using something like Nmap or Nessus against the subject or victim organization to be able to determine what we're going to exploit and how we're going to work our way in. Ultimately, it is going to help us save a lot of time in fingerprinting and enumeration, depending on the web presence. For some organizations, it's hanging out there for everybody to see. For other organizations, it's a little bit tougher. But the most important thing for me, honestly, would be to enable a tester to see what an unauthorized adversary is going to see. Because, you know, you have your scoping documents before you go into testing, but the thing about that is, organizations tell you quite a bit, but they're not going to necessarily tell. My apologies, I had to mute there for a moment to sneeze, but you know, it's organizations don't send out things to an adversary and say, you're only allowed to test between these hours and you can only use these techniques. Which is one reason why I like red teaming more so than pen testing, because it's more objective based. But at the same time, it allows you to see what a malicious actor would see, so that you can tell that client, hey, this is what's out there. And then in some cases, it actually could give you insight on as to which actor or actors to emulate to help the organization understand what they may be subjected to. And if not, I mean, obviously you want to find ways to remediate any problems that are there, but sometimes the answer to remediate it is not to remediate it, but rather to establish a very strict detection mechanism. And if that's the case, then if you're emulating someone, then obviously you're helping an organization build a method by which they can detect. So in this, when we talk about context and insight from the technology perspective, things that I typically try to look for would be domains and hosts. And there's a few ways we can do that, and I'll show you a few here in a few moments. But we want to find out what's going on in terms of what hosts they have on the internet, because oftentimes they don't use nondescript host names on the internet. Subdomain names are typically fairly descript because they want people to be able to access it. It's on the internet, right? So being able to find the domains associated with that and the hosts or subdomains, that could be very important, because it's going to afford us the opportunity to say, this technology is running, they have this host, so that means this, and so on. We can also ascertain their security and compliance posture through DNS. So what I mean by that is, I'm going to say this rhetorically, but can anyone think of any, I've got one specific surefire way that you can actually ascertain someone's security and compliance posture using DNS. So I'm going to pause for just a moment and rhetorically allow you to reflect on that for a moment. So as we think about the different types of DNS records, we have the A records, we have the quad A's, we have MX, we have NS, we have start of authority. Text records is where I would be looking for this, and I'll show you what I mean by that when I get to the demonstration portion. But as we look through domains, hosts, and DNS, we may be able to find specific systems, including the operating system and any versions, particular software associated with things, which then leads us to the ability to potentially find vulnerabilities and identify vendors. And while vendors themselves, obviously, I could mention SolarWinds, but that's not really the scope of what I'm looking at for this. I mean, you can find opportunities to do things for or against a vendor in a supply chain attack. That is possible. But at the same time, that's not the main scope of what I'm referring to. I'm more referring along the lines of phishing and having context to be able to maintain conversation with potential targets, employees of the target company, and be able to gain rapport with them to seem like an insider, to get them to trust you and give you the information you seek. From a people perspective, there's a few things that we can look for this. If there's a phishing element of the engagement, knowing the email syntax is vital. And there are passive ways of finding it, but we want to find that context somewhere. And in doing so, basically, you don't want to go sending a bunch of emails to first.lastname@company when it's actually first initial last name or something to that effect. But also within the perspective of people, you want to enumerate who the high value assets are. And what I said before, not all employees are necessarily equal in that regard, because the C-suite, in my experience, I've learned that oftentimes the C-suite has more access than they really need, because what it typically boils down to would be that the C-suite basically leverages their authority and says, I need admin access so I can install things, with or without the knowledge of help desk or the appropriate process. And there's really nothing that can be done about that, because I don't foresee anybody being able to go to their CEO and say, no, sir, or no, ma'am, you cannot have admin access, because more than likely, if someone said that to their CEO, some CEOs would respect that, but a lot of other CEOs would say, thanks, but no thanks. I wish you the best in your future endeavors. Please pack up your desk and get out. But we also have other high-ranking employees and executives. Like when I look at in the United States, we have one of the federal agencies that we have would be the Securities and Exchanges Commission, which govern um, mandatory reporting for publicly traded companies. So, as a byproduct of that, they have to submit quarterly and annual reports. And it lists the entire board of directors. It lists a lot of the C-suite, not the entire C-suite, but it also lists the high-level and high-ranking employees within the accounting um, organization chart. So something like that could definitely give really solid insight into who may be a good target for a phishing or vishing engagement. But in addition to that, HR, accounting, purchasing, they all have access to things that could be valuable. Obviously, accounting and purchasing, they have access to the money, and we all like the money. But HR, they have access. In some cases, they could have access to employee account information for, say, direct deposit. But they also have access to some very sensitive employee information that an adversary could potentially monetize very easily in a variety of marketplaces. In addition to that, help desk, they're always a really solid target because let's face it, those of us in security, even system administration, and some of the other tech disciplines, we tend to kind of discard help desk because it's a very, oftentimes a low-level position, typically not very well paid. Typically they have to ask the question no less than 100 times a day of, have you tried turning it off and back on again, or just resetting the password. So they are the front lines, though. They have access to. Oftentimes they have administrative access, whether it be full administrative or just limited administrative access. But they have some, and they have the ability to make changes to things like do password resets or potentially make rule changes to firewalls or something to that effect. Not always, but it depends on the size and the scope of the organization. And then obviously if you're dealing with people administering certain technologies, whether it be like a security administrator or a network administrator, you might be able to convince them to create a firewall rule that would allow you in, or you may be able to convince them to turn on a service so that you could exploit it or something to that effect. But with people, you can also find the cultural norms and the company norms. So right now, obviously, in a global pandemic, life is a little bit different. So we don't necessarily need to worry about the culture in the office as much for most of the targets that we would be looking at, because I don't think there's a whole lot of physical pen testing going on right now. But from that same lens, you do want to know about what is considered normal in the company, what is considered normal culturally. Also, you want to find out what the companies call their employees. For example, Walmart in the United States, they don't call their employees employees. They call them associates. Or, for example, Disney, they don't call their employees employees. They call them cast members. So that's something that if you were doing a phishing or vishing engagement and you were posing as an insider, if you called either of those sets of people employees, you have completely just outed yourself. So with logic flaws, that's going to be things like your processes and your procedures. That's going to be things like when the network administrator forwards the email and says, don't click this link, but they don't defang the link and they don't sinkhole the link. They just allow people to go to it. You can get a lot of stuff with it, employee complaints, especially like on things like Glassdoor or LinkedIn. But then if they don't have good privacy controls on their Facebook or other social media accounts, some people may go home and vent, and you might be able to learn about problems that way. Oftentimes, you can also find logic flaws when technology isn't necessarily integrated, and oftentimes that can actually be enumerated using DNS. So, from a technology perspective, where do we start? So in this regard, I like to start with domain information. From that lens, um, looking here at the discussion, can anyone? I would like to hear your thoughts in terms of who here has really seriously thought about using DNS as a source of OSINT. All right, seeing a few thumbs up coming across. Okay, so honestly, I like to use DNS for OSINT because you can query DNS without leaving a bunch of logs with your target. So there's a lot of stuff that you can accomplish from this. You can find out a lot about their vendors. You can find out a lot about everything just by using DNS. And for DNS, you can use the command line like dig or host, but you also get additional information out of web-based services like View DNS, Security Trails, or DNS Dumpster, for example. So in that regard, it's important to know what kind of records we're going to look at. So with A records, you may also see this via CNAME or Quad A, but based on host names and subdomain names, we may be able to find out possible technologies. Like if you see exchange.company.domain, that's pretty indicative that they're running an Exchange server. Or web. That pretty much means it's a web server, right? Unless they're running some serious deception and honeypot architecture, which I doubt. You're going to be able to enumerate the technologies based on host names. Also within host names, you can get the IP addresses and IP ranges, which then can tell you this is who the hosting provider is, or in some cases, this is who the content distribution network is through. So you've got to be careful and tiptoe across their stuff so that you don't end up getting put on a block list. Within the text records, most notably, you can look at vendors, but I prefer to look at SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. SPF being Sender Policy Framework, DKIM being Domain Keys Identified Mail, DMARC being Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance. Those are 3 email, and I'm using air quotes here, authentication techniques. Ultimately, they don't really do a whole lot for security. They do more for protecting a domain's reputation and affording other domains the ability to find out what is fraudulent, but they also hinge upon the recipient of an email to actually do the reciprocated checks to actually verify that the message is authentic and it came from an authorized source and what have you. And whenever I was referring to the whole compliance posture, that's what I was referring to. Because, like, for example, in the United States, most notably in the United States back in 2017, 2018, the federal government mandated that all federal agencies have DMARC enabled as part of a thing called Binding Operating Directive 1801, BOD 1801. And as a byproduct of that, you had a lot of agencies that were standing up. So to explain this, let me back up for a moment. For DMARC to work, you have to have SPF configured, and you have to have DKIM configured, and then you have to have a DMARC record that defines the actions to be taken. I'll show you this, no big deal. But this directive mandated that all agencies have DMARC. So what happened was a lot of people implemented SPF. They did the DKIM thing, but if you look at their SPF policy and their DMARC policy, they are both either not enforced or very poorly enforced. So that typically, what I see that what that leads me to believe is the organization either lacks security maturity or they have implemented the technology solely for the purpose of checking a box to say, yes, this is implemented. But in terms of vendors, we can typically find text-based verifications to ascertain ownership. MX Records, that can give us things like mail provider. It can also give us server host names. It can also tell us if anyone is filtering their email, like Mimecast or Proofpoint or something to that effect. Start of authority and name servers, that's going to tell us potentially about content distribution networks and hosting providers. So it's really not too challenging to come across this. C names, you might be able to see that, you may not. It depends on the configuration of the provider. So here are some websites that I like to use for all this. Honestly, the top three give you they give you fairly unique information. I tend to use all three of those. I've recently just came across ns.tools, and I'm going to show you why I really like it here in a moment. But basically, these are the websites that I would use to do the DNS type of enumeration, and specifically View DNS, DNS Dumpsters, and DNS Dumpster and Security Trails. They all give you a different vantage point and a different perspective, so I tend to look at all three of them whenever I'm assessing an organization. And I've started integrating NS tools into that equation as well. Can anyone think of any other examples in addition to these? So let's take a look at some demonstration here. Can everyone see my Kali screen here? Okay. Cool. All right. So in playing with this, we're going to look at Dig. This is the man page for Dig. So it's the DNS Lookup Utility. And then basically we can give it all of this information and do all sorts of fun stuff with it. The most basic syntax for this, I'm going to just do dig target.com, and we're going to say any. So the basic syntax would be the dig command, the organization that we are looking at, and the type of record we are looking for. And in this case, I'm saying any, which should pull up anything that's there. So in this case, we see there's their NS records, and we have any right here. So we're not getting a whole lot. What we can see right here with their name servers, akam.net, that's Akamai, external DNS. So there's at least two different providers for name servers, which is probably built for redundancy based on what happened with the Dyn denial of service about 5 years ago. So that's not telling us a whole lot, but we can actually specify a particular server to query. And I tend to do quad 9, but you can do quad 8 or whatever DNS server you want to do. You do this, and okay, we get the same information. So let's change this from any to text. So we're looking at text records now. So this changed, right? So look at all the stuff we're getting right here. So right here, this is an MS. MS equals MS, that string. Would anybody want to wager against me and say that this is probably not a Microsoft domain verification? Yeah, that's a bet I wouldn't want to take because I'm pretty confident that it is. And then we have global sign right here, so that's for their SSL and TLS certificates. We have Google site verification, workplace domain verification, NS Monitor. We can find out what that's all about. That's just a search away. Here's Adobe. Here's Facebook. Here's something that's nondescript, so unsure what's going on there. That could be a hash of something. We could potentially drop that in Hashcat and find out what it means, if anything. Sometimes you might find some stuff that's base 64 encoded in here that you can play with. Here's a Stripe verification. So for something, they're accepting payment via Stripe. And then right here we have this, which appears to be base 64 encoded. And then right here is the SPF record. So we see that if breaking down the SPF record, we have it to where if it's an A record or a pointer record, a PTR, it can send authorized emails as target.com. But then we have all of these IPv4 addresses. And this allows us to enumerate that we now can look at their network range. So for example, 161.225.201.20 through 23, and then 161.225.196.20 through 23. And then we have a few others that we can look at here as well. So there are some IP ranges for us to take a look at. We can find out shared hosting with that. A lot of things that we can look at with this, but importantly, look right here. So we see include. We're going to looking at the portion that's highlighted. We see include spf.clearslide.com, spf.mandrillapp.com, everbridge.net, and servers.mcsv.net. These are all service providers that are authorized to send emails on behalf of Target. So Mandrill and MCSV are MailChimp. I'm not entirely sure what ClearSlide and Everbridge are, but quite literally, that's simply a Google search away. So these are all service providers that we can potentially impersonate whenever we phish someone. Also, looking at this gives us an idea of their security posture. And typically, if I see more than one IP address listed, especially this many, this tells me that it's probably not the most secure setup. But with the SPF record, there's another thing that tells me that as well. And that's right here. So the three possible outcomes that you could have here. What we see with the tilde all is a soft fail. And then we can have a hyphen all, which is a hard fail. And then we might see question mark all or question mark none, and that's exactly that. It does absolutely nothing. So a hard fail basically means that if it doesn't meet this requirement, it's almost certainly going to end up in quarantine or a spam box. If you have soft fail on, it pretty much means that unless the recipient is actually doing verbose checking, that nothing's going to happen. So this is one of those, they mean well, but it's not fully enforced, so this could be compliance driven. So that's looking at the text record. We can continue with this, and instead of looking at text records, we look at A records. So this just tells us the 4 hosts that compromise target.com as a whole. So we're able to get a little bit of information about the hosting providers here as well. We can look next at the MX record. So this tells us that SMTP-TTE and TTC .target.com are their mail servers. That's not telling us anything about who they may be using for email filtering or anything along those lines, which they still could be. Oftentimes, you might see, like for example, Walmart. We see pphosted.com, and that is Proofpoint. So in that regard, we can see that Proofpoint is an authorized, or is who receives the email. So before it ends up in Walmart's inboxes, it's going to go through Proofpoint. With Target, we don't see that. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. It's just to say that we can't readily see it. The pointer record, so we see this right here as well, but nothing there. So we just get pushed over to the start of authority. So that's pretty much what we have to see here within the traditional scope of looking at DNS. And honestly, using Dig, the biggest thing that you're going to get from this would be the text records. But also from the same lens of the text record thing, if we do underscore dmark.target.com and look for the text record, This gives us the DMARC policy. And right here, see P equals none. This is 100% for compliance, because P equals none means that policy is set to none. You can also see policy set to quarantine and policy set to reject. For example, I'll show you how I've got my website configured for DMARC. If I can spell today. So notice with mine, I have policy set to quarantine. It's going to check 100% of the emails. The RUA and the RUF, those are reporting email addresses. So I've got nondescript stuff here. Reporting interval is once per day. I have ASPF and ADChem, which would be the alignment set to strict. And this is just a reporting format. Whereas if we look at Target, they literally have policy set to none, forensic turned on, and then they have who they report to, but because the policy is set to none, nothing's going to come up forensically, so they're not going to receive any emails based upon this. So that's an example of doing things from a compliance perspective. Comparatively speaking, looking at Walmart, they've got theirs a little bit tighter than I even have mine, because they have theirs set to reject, but all of their stuff goes to emaildefense.proofpoint.com. So that's an example of assessing an organization's posture based upon that. Does that make sense for everyone? So now we'll start playing with some of the web stuff. And for this is View DNS. We're going to be able to see a lot of the same stuff. So like we can do the domain report right here. So we do target.com. And this is going to show us a lot of the same stuff. There's the Akamai, the EXT DNS. Name servers have public IPs. MX Records. And that's all we have here. But we also see here's a CNAME. So it's going, target.com is actually going to move to fastly.net. So we could actually do a search and find out more about what that's associated with. So we can search Google for this and see what it is. It's an edge cloud platform, so it's a content distribution network. So that actually looks pretty good on Target's behalf. But then we can go back here to the tools, and we can see what other hosts are listed on the same IP address. So this is going to resolve the IP address, and it's going to find out who else is there. So partnersonline.com and roundel.com, we can find out what they are. This is a good way to find out. This is going to be a way to find out mergers and acquisitions and other means for connecting. So basically, this right here tells us that this is for people doing business with Target. So pretty interesting there. And then with roundel.com, we can take another look at that as well, see what's going on here. So it's a Target Media Network is now known as Roundel. So they changed the name. So this allows you to find out other things they're associated with. Using Walmart as an example, we can see that, there's walmart.com. So this is apparently the French Canadian Walmart. mylifeasdolls.com, walmartlivebetter.canada, walmartgamecenter.com. So we're able to see things that are associated with Walmart, and that's only based upon those IP addresses, the resolution of those IP addresses. This can be somewhat skewed a little bit by viewing things across, like if they use a content distribution network, that can potentially mess with it. Obviously, you can look at Whois. Most people are using some level of domain privacy for Whois now, but not everyone. So we'll take a quick look at Target and see what they have. So yeah, this is definitely not a fun search there. Or that's reverse who is lookup. That's why. So going right here and looking at target.com under this is what we were looking for. So we see that it's domain names admin, so it's a nondescript name. We see an email here, but it's not giving away email syntax. It does give us a phone number, but I mean that could be to a switchboard or something. That could be pretty tricky to get around. We get the address, and that's all we have from this. So that's actually pretty good from DNS. Um, and then from this, we can check for DNS. We can check for an abuse point of contact. We can check for various firewall tests. Right here, something I'm going to talk about later, but I'll go ahead and show you here. We can get the HTTP headers as well. So this saves us the trouble of having to run Nmap or something for this. In some cases, depending upon configuration. So for this right here, basically we just see some things that could potentially help us. So we've got a 301 redirect here. We can see some information about the cookie expiration dates and times, what it's associated with, and things along those lines. And then they do employ strict transport security, including subdomains, so that's good. And then the other thing with this, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't be scanning things, but View DNS has a built-in port scanner. It's not going to be as thorough as Nmap, but what it is going to do is it's going to allow you to at least see if these ports are open, which could give you an idea. Like if I saw remote desktop, the one at the bottom, if I saw that open, I would probably lose my mind. So this affords you the opportunity to do a scan using someone else's IP address. So this is a pretty decent starting point. And that's View DNS. The next one is DNS Dumpster. With DNS Dumpster, we're going to look at the same domain, and we're going to see a lot of the same information. What's different is we are able to see where things are hosted. So, like, for example, there's the Akamai, there's some local network stuff, Rackspace, Amazon, AT&T, and Fastly. So with the DNS stuff, we're able to see right here. Oh, those are internal DNS servers. That's a problem, I do believe. There's our MX records. Here's everything that we've seen before. We're not going to go through all this again. Here's the host record. So we're able to see more hosts here than we were in View DNS or in Dig. And this is why I look at everything multiple times. But notice right here, SMTP01 target.com. That's a public-facing SMTP server. SNAT01, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but that could be network address translation, or it could mean something else. Right here we see UAT. UAT usually stands for User Acceptance Testing. IPD2 VM-host 01. That sounds like a virtual machine to me. Let's see if it'll let us connect. While we're at it, I'll go ahead and see if I can connect to this UAT host as well. And the worst thing that they can do is block my IP address, but it doesn't look like anything's going to resolve here anyway. So we can do that, and then even within this, we can hover and we can find. We can look at the HTTP headers here. We can trace the path. We can do banner grabbing, all of that here. So attempting the banner grab. So that's all we have here. So it's not bad information. There's a lot we can do with it. The size of target definitely works against us in this regard. Looking at the HTTP headers of this host, we'll see if anything pops up. Doesn't appear as if anything's going to. Yeah, error connecting, so not a surprise there. But we're able to look through this, and for some organizations, it's going to be that way. In other cases, it's not going to be quite as cut and dry. So there's a lot that can be gathered here. So like right here, we see there's an IIS server running IIS version 10.0. So that's some useful information for the purpose of pen testing right there. Here's an OpenSSH server running in Rackspace. So there could be some fun. There could be fun to be had there. Right here, they're running Apache on this, as well as Big IP. So we have that, but this right here also helps us because we can click on View Graph, and this allows us to look and see. Like we can zoom in here, and this shows which hosts are hosted where. So we see right here, this is on Fastly, this is on Amazon, we have this on Conti, we have this stuff on Rackspace. So like with Rackspace, for example, we've just got some of this stuff here, but then we have like test.wiki collab. That one's fairly interesting to me. I'm just nosy. Wouldn't let me connect. Bummer. But we're able to see all of that information here within this graph. And the graph, it's in beta, but it's still there. And then also, you've got this picture here. And granted, this is for Target. It's even worse for Walmart, but this allows you to see every host and how they're connected and what's co-located on what IP address and what have you. For a small organization, that'd be very, very powerful in that regard. But someone the size of Target, it's just kind of tricky. Using my publisher as an example, No Starch, they're a lot smaller, so it's a lot more manageable to view this. So with this, we see they're using Cloudflare and Google. Cloudflare for their DNS, Google for their email. Text record, there's their SPF record, there's their Google site verification. Here's something else. We only see these 4 hosts, and we can look at the graph for it and notice how much more manageable this is. So we're able to see the MX records, here's the A records, here's the DNS infrastructure. So this gives us a very quick lay of the land before we commence any form of engagement against them. And then we were able to do the exact same thing with the graph here. So No Starch is more or less what you would probably expect to see for an organization that you may be testing, but then again, you may end up testing someone the size of Target. The final website I'll show, well, the next to final website I'll show you here is Security Trails. And gotta get myself logged in here. There we go. So for Security Trails, we can do the exact same thing and say target.com. And the reason that I like Security Trails is because you can look at all the subdomains. So we're able to see all 2,000 of them. And there is a paid version of Security Trails. I'm particularly logged into a version that I pay for. So I'm going to be able to see a little bit more than a free account. But notably, right here, you have historical data. And this allows you to see when they move things around and when they onboard or offboard a vendor. And then you can see whenever they change their text records, this would be an indication of changes within their internal infrastructure and what have you. So we can go back and say, oh, well, they just moved to all these IP ranges approximately 18 months ago. Like, as of 2 years ago, this was their entire DNS record for at least a day. They deleted all the other stuff, and apparently it broke something, so then they had to put it back. So the historical data is the big thing that you want to see regarding security trails. Also with this, you can pivot and click an IP address and see what else is on the IP address. So this allows us to see what else is there as well. So there's a lot of different things to do with this, but what it boils down to is, the old saying, you don't put all your eggs in the same basket. This is what I'm trying to prevent you from doing. I'm showing you as many baskets as possible to put your eggs in. So that's security trails. The last thing from this vein I'm going to show you is going to be NS Tools, NS.Tools. With this one, we type in the domain. It's going to give us a lot of the same information. But here's the big difference. For DKIM specifically, you cannot readily search for DKIM unless you know the selector. You may be able to brute force the selector, or if someone from the domain has emailed you, you can get the selector out of the header. This website actually does it beforehand for you. So this talks about some of the problems with it. We have some warning level stuff. So we're able to take a look and say, okay, well, this is what's going on, and so on. So we're able to find out what's going on. And then we can look through the DNS. This is going to tell us everything. We can look about their DNSSEC, so they don't have DNSSEC. We can click here, look at some host data. Here's the whois data that we can look at. Okay, cool. So this tells us the same stuff. Domain manager, we've already seen that. We can look at reputation information, see if there's any bad reputation stuff. Right here is the email stuff, SPF. But right here, this tells us the domain keys. So K1 and S1 would be their names for that. And we can actually look, and it would actually tell us, like, we can look a little bit more thoroughly with this and ascertain the key size to know what they're doing regarding DKIM in terms of what the length of the key is, because DKIM can support a few different key lengths, and sometimes that is dependent upon your hosting provider. In other cases, it is dependent upon your actual configuration. So that's running through DNS. There's a lot to go with that. I know I spent a lot of time with it, but there's a lot of information that can be ascertained from that besides just here are the hosts you scan. Does anyone did that enlighten anyone? And does anyone have any questions before I move into the technology enumeration for the final section? Okay, moving right along here. For the technology enumeration, again, host names can do that. We can get a lot of stuff from job postings and then third-party websites. So View DNS, I already showed you that. I'm going to very briefly show you Built With and Wapalizer. I'm not really going to spend a lot of time with Shodan. It's a little bit more mainstream and easy for people to pick up on. Built With and Wapalizer are a little bit more obscure, so I'll be running with them today. But basically, Built With, between Built With and Wapalizer, Built With is more detailed, but at times it can be information overload. It does have an API, so you can build your own tools with that as well. Wapalizer, it's got a far simpler interface. Oftentimes the information is a lot less detailed, but it's a lot more consumable. And they both have free and paid tiers, as well as browser extensions and plugins, depending on what verbiage your particular browser uses. So in that regard, Shodan also has free and paid tiers. You're not going to get a whole lot out of free, but you can get some stuff. Depending on the organization, it can be a wide swath of information, or it can be next to nothing. Oftentimes, it requires specific search operators, and it can have port scan and banner information as well. And then again, View DNS has the HTTP headers and the port scanner. But why don't I just do like my own Nmap scan, right? Why don't I? Well, honestly, nothing's stopping you, to be honest, but it's not necessarily OSINT. And the thing is, if you do it, if you use like these resources, you're allowing someone else to take the fall for doing the scan. But basically, you're able to hone in on what's already there, so that you can optimize what you are actually scanning for, and modify your parameters for testing, so that you have less opportunity to be detected, which at the end of the day is what we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, you may also find another unauthorized adversary that's in the system. It can make for an epic report, but it could delay testing, because if you find another adversary in there, that's one of those conditions under most statements of work that would require you to pick up the phone and make a call. So you can pick all that stuff up via scanning at times. Actually, I won't show you Built With and Wapalizer. They're fairly simple. You just search the domain and it'll tell you. Time permitting, which I don't know if I'll have time or not, I can show it to you. But basically, with Google Dorking, honestly, I found a lot of actionable information via Google Dorking. If I were doing a vishing engagement, I tend to like to spoof fax numbers from vendors to call my target company. So that's how I come across their fax number. I'll just use the Google Dork site, vendor.com, in text, fax, to get phone numbers to actually call. I'll do site target.com, in text, area code, country code, whatever is unique enough about the organization to get the information. You can also enumerate employees to contact via LinkedIn. For phishing, same thing. But then you can also enumerate email addresses via the site target.com in text. And then you want to escape the @ symbol. And then if you want to look for specific file types, you can also add like PDF, docx, or Excel to be able to get some additional goodies out of it. I'll share with you a very vague case study that I've recently dealt with from a bug bounty platform. So basically, I was teaching a business OSINT course, one of my 8-hour courses, and we were doing these. I was demonstrating these dorks against a company, and I started out, and the company was not Target.com. So I only selected Target.com today because I hadn't picked on them in a while. But basically, I was doing some of the previous ones of like at domain or whatever. But then I also started looking for things containing Gmail, Yahoo, and Live.com. And I came across a PDF that had a list of contractors, and they had a responsible disclosure program through a particular bug bounty provider. So I wrote it all up. I submitted it. Basically, they said that was the contractor's work information, and it was not applicable. So, okay, cool. But I continued looking through the results of that dork, and I found an interesting email address in a sales and product page. Specifically, it was on an item review. I did a search of the email across like data breaches and other websites. Didn't really find a whole lot of anything. But I did copy and paste the exact verbiage of the comment, and I found gold. And basically what I found was that specific verbiage allowed me to uncover another site that was a direct clone of the organization that I was evaluating for using this dork. So as I looked through it, I compared the source code. There was about I think the source code for the real site was like 417 lines of code. The cloned website had like 531. Basically, they were using the same CSS, and they had they'd used HTTrack to clone the website at a point in time, and they didn't have the things dynamically set up. It mimicked the target good enough, though. So basically, they never claimed to be the company, but they were using a lot of the same stuff from the company, and it was in another country. So basically, the items on the front page were different. The pricing was different, but the product reviews had the exact same comments, and that's what gave this away. And again, the comment saying this was cloned on such and such date by HT track was left in the code. So some rookie stuff, right? And as you went through the actual checkout process, it was almost the same. The real website prompts you to create an account or continue as a guest. This fraudulent website did not. It immediately asked you for a lot of very sensitive personal information. I put in some dummy information, and then it asked for a credit card number or Bitcoins as opposed to Bitcoin. Doing a little bit of analysis on it, the website was hosted by a Russian hosting company, and co-hosted on the same IP was a domain of someone's name. So at the end of the day, the company that I disclosed it to, they thanked me, but they still marked it as not applicable, and it did some reputational damage on the platform. But at the end of the day, what can you do, right? So that being said, we'll take a look. Actually, we don't have time for the Google hacking database. I will briefly show you the Google hacking database. There's the domain for it. But to get to it, it's very simple. You just go to exploitdb.com, and it's under Google hacking database. If you go on ExploitDB, you can click right here on the side, and it'll tell you. Actually, right here is a dork to identify SolarWinds information. So from this, we can drop this, and I'll actually do this because it is timely. So I'm just going to hop over to Google. This is going to do a search to look for Orion web consoles exposed to the internet. And here we go. Ooh, looky there. So some of these aren't necessarily malicious. Some of these may be. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with this, and then right here, obviously, there's some other things. I will be sending over the PDF to the conference to disseminate at the upon completion of the presentation today. But with Google Hacking Database, you can look for all sorts of things. Like, for example, we got that dork out of this. But then you can even go back and say, look right here. So, like, here's a Netcam XL and what have you. Very briefly, let me get to Google. We'll say site target.com in text. So with this is going to show us anywhere that has the @target.com. That's really not going to help us too much. But if we set the file type to PDF, now this is going to pull up PDFs that have email addresses in it. So what I would do from here is search for the @ symbol, and that's why this is coming up right here. So this just appears to be an ethics training type thing, but nevertheless, it's telling you ethics privacy so it's giving you a few email addresses to play with, so you can get pretty decent information out of that as well. And honestly, Google dorking, I could have probably presented for 2 or more hours on Google dorking alone, just as I probably could on DNS as well, because I could have taken that far deeper. Regarding career postings, I'll just tell you more or less what to look for there. What I tend to do is I try to go and look at technology jobs. Like I'll go to, for example, Target.com careers. I'll search for that. I'll look at current job openings, look at corporate, and then from here, I might look at human resources, but the ones that I tend to really have a lot of fun with would be the technology ones. From here, you've got the types of jobs, but we'll just, for the sake of time, we'll just look at all the opportunities. And then from here, we'll see if we can find something right off the bat. Like the data science stuff, you can probably find out that they're using Python or something like that. We'll just find something. There's something about React, edge computing, so we have that. More React stuff. Bilingual UX designer, business intelligence, talent analytics, asset protection. Here's information security. We'll take a look at this. So they're looking for some certs. They're looking for some people with some SOC experience, but they don't mention anything specifically. But oftentimes they will say something like, you have to have explicit experience with Splunk or with like a Cisco ASA or whatever, and it's going to give you various pieces of information about this. Like they're doing this very vaguely, which is actually really good. But some organizations, I have seen career postings where they say, I'm looking for someone with experience with Oracle ERP version 12.2.5. And once I see that version, I immediately hop over to Exploit DB and boom, there's a method of entry. So with that being said, I'll open it up for questions. We've got about 5 minutes left. I've got just a few housekeeping slides to show you. So it is open for questions, so feel free to ask any questions right now. Sharing with you, I've got training. I offer training as the OSINT. Right now, I have a Black Friday coupon code. It is good for another 6 days. It is for a minimum of 33% off the cost of a course. You can bundle courses if you want. If you want a custom bundle, something I've not defined as a bundle, you can email contact@theoscension.com. If you're interested in bundles or individual courses, there are the links for that. Right now, I have 5 courses being offered. People OSINT, Business OSINT, OPSEC. Actually, let me back up. People and Business OSINT are 8-hour courses. OPSEC for OSINT and Privacy is a 6-hour course. And then I'm about to release a course that is Alternative and Advanced Search Engine OSINT, which is a 4-hour course. And Optical Character Recognition, Photo, and Video Analysis as well, which is another 4-hour course. Those will both be released at the end of the first quarter. I'm also in the process of creating an introduction to social engineering and a technical social engineering course, a Linux course, a Python automation, scripting, and APIs, basically a create your own tool course, an investigative process or professional investigations course, as well as a course about how to use the OSINT tools. And I'm also working on some on-demand material for potentially a variety of providers. Beyond that, here's my contact information. And again, opening up for any questions anyone may have.
Sir, I think there are some questions in Q&A. So.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was in discuss. What's the difference between OSINT and a commercial threat intelligence feed? OSINT is more proactive in nature, whereas a commercial threat intelligence feed is based on collective information on things that have already happened. Regarding OSINT, it can be offensive or defensive in nature, whereas a commercial threat intelligence feed, it has an intelligence context, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, it honestly, the two are very complementary. But threat intelligence feeds are based on something that has already happened, where OSINT may not have happened yet. The next question: data collection is a serious issue in many parts of the world, especially in the U.S. and the EU, with various regulations like COPPA, CCPA, GDPR, etc. Does OSINT fall under those? Yes and no. So obviously, if you collect and retain any information in a commercial sense, then yes. But at the same time, not necessarily. It all depends on what your collection and retention. But also from that same lens, I will say that things like COPPA, CCPA, and GDPR, while they don't necessarily govern OSINT, they have impacted OSINT and the ease and ability to collect information because there's a lot more data limiting associated now because you're not able to readily go out and just collect everything on everybody. Difference between footprinting, reconnaissance, and OSINT. Footprinting and reconnaissance are formal terms put within like an ethical hacking process. OSINT is a technique that can be used for either of the two. Reconnaissance is just passively watching to learn about a target or an organization, whereas footprinting is doing a little bit of interactive testing to find out more about what it is in terms of the operating system, service version, all that fun stuff. Any other questions?
Guys, you can ask your questions, so Sir will answer to them. If there's any questions, please put out them in the Q&A section. Okay, I guess we'll just give one more minute. We'll check it out. So if anyone has any question. Hello, sir. I think there's one question for you.
Uh, yep.
Yes, sir.
The CTF experiences. Uh, so yeah, I've competed in a variety of OSINT CTFs. Some of them have been business oriented, so looking at collecting information about businesses. Some have been missing persons. Some have been using what are called vol targets. And basically, the way that it works, oftentimes it's live fire, meaning that you're not looking for fictional people. You're looking for a real person, either because they are a missing person or because you have their consent. Or you may be passively looking at a business to collect information about them so that ultimately you submit everything just based upon that. Like, for example, when I run my business OSINT course, I have a CTF element at the end of it. And I have identified 5 businesses that I've went and collected information about, like OSINT flags. I've collected it myself, so I know it's there for people to collect. For the missing person CTF, the way that typically works is Trace Labs. They're a nonprofit organization out of Canada. They work with various law enforcement agencies around the world, and whenever they put together a competition, they identify between 6 and 15 missing people. And basically, you have between 6 and 8 hours and a team of up to 4 people to find out as much information within their defined categories about the missing person as possible and submit it for the judges to validate and award points for. And then at the end of it, they deduplicate the information, they package it up, and they pass it off to law enforcement as appropriate. So it's a lot different than like a network CTF because everybody's looking for the same information, but they're not doing it the same ways. And you're not using tools or exploits or anything like that. It's purely passive.
Anything else, guys? Have any more? You can ask Sir anything else if you would like to. Okay, then. I guess no more questions, sir. Okay. So once again, sir, please share the presentation document so that we can refer.
Yep. I will. What I will do is, as soon as I close this up, and as soon as I take the PowerPoint off of full screen, I will export it to PDF, and I will email it to the conference organizers for them to disseminate as appropriate.
Sure, sir. We will do that. Okay. Okay. So any OSINT projects you can share? So they're asking that.
I am putting my GitHub in the discussion. My GitHub has my Decepticon bot, which is more of a disinformation bot for Twitter. I'm going to be releasing a few new OSINT tools in the coming months, as well, dealing with EXIF data, optical character recognition, things along those lines. And a lot of the stuff I have, I'm constantly doing some stuff in the Discord for the Ascension, where basically I will crowdsource it and say, hey, who wants to work on this? This is the amount of experience required. And there's a link to the Discord I just put into the discussion box as well. Right now, we don't have anything actively going on, but there's going to be some stuff coming up in the new year. I just had to get a few things off my plate first.
All right. Thank you, sir. So once again, sir, thank you from all the audience for all the informative talk, and also thank you from the Red Team Hacker Academy for giving out your time, coming here and sharing such a wonderful session over here. Thank you, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes, I'm here. I just,
Yes,
I,
sir.
I'm
No problem, sir. So, can you just wait on the backstage? Could you give me like 2 minutes? So I will just give some information out to the audience and come backstage.
Sure. I'm going to step away for just a second, but I will stay logged in and on the backstage. But it'll
Sure,
be a
sir.
moment before I come back.
Sure, sir. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks everyone for spending your time with me as I shared this. I hope it's been valuable. Feel free to reach out. I'll try to help you if I can. I try to be as responsive as possible. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But
Thank you.